Welcome back to Boilers Extra. I'm Nathan Baird from the Indy Star.
Sam King from the Journal and Courier.
Hope you're all having a good holiday season and enjoying a happy new year as you're listening to this. A lot of you probably, this is going up on New Year's Eve, but hopefully you're all celebrating a fun and happy New Year's. There's a lot going on with Purdue football that we'll probably talk about later more comprehensively on a different episode. But today we're going to talk about Purdue basketball, the resumption of Big Ten play, catching up on some things that happened late in this back end of the calendar year, I should say, over the last couple of weeks. But Sam, you're going up to Minnesota on Thursday for the resumption of the Big Ten season. And what would you kind of say is just the vibe of this team right now? We came into a year, excuse me, where obviously they're going through an identity change when you lose someone like Zach Edey and figuring out what this new identity is going to be. What do you feel like this team's just general vibe is as it gets ready to resume the pursuit of a third straight championship?
I talking to, and we've talked, listen, most of the year we've talked to the same three guys. And if you look at the stats, you can understand which three guys those are and why we're talking to them extensively. But they were all starters on the team that was in the national championship game in April. And those are players who expect to win. And it's almost like, even after the Auburn loss, kind of almost a shock when they don't, and they don't sugarcoat it. When they get beat, they've been around long enough to say, hey, basketball happens sometimes like that, and we'll go on to the next one. I think the vibe of the team really is kind of this three-man show that thinks it can vie for a Big Ten championship with the other pieces around them, which right now looks like a 9-man rotation. So 6 other guys really just kind of contributing their little pieces to this quest for a third Big Ten title in a row.
I would definitely say that it's a team that really genuinely feels like it's trusting a process, that it knew that this was going to be a bit of a push-pull here early on in the season. They knew it was a really challenging schedule. I think they wanted to answer that challenge better in a couple of instances, obviously, but I don't think they look at those as being dismissive of what they can accomplish this season. So when you talk to these guys after games, whether it's a win like against Toledo the other night, whether it is a lopsided loss, you definitely get the vibe from them that they're still trusting the way that this is playing out, that they still bought into something in the preseason. And considering this team, loses Daniel Jacobson early on, goes through a pretty big shift to the small ball philosophy, and considering all that was happening within a pretty tough schedule, then to get to this point 9-4 is both a stray from where they probably wanted to be at this point. Like I said, I think they wanted to answer some of those bigger challenges better, but I think they have also seen enough good things to know that if they negate some of the issues that they've had, or at least tamp them down a little bit, that it's going to result in wins in some of those scenarios this next time around.
Yeah, absolutely. And a big reason for that is because these guys have all followed a philosophy the last 2 years. It was a little bit different with the ball going through a 7'4" guy and the offense playing off of that. But even when things didn't go well, they stuck with that process, and ultimately good things happened over the course of a season. The reason that you play a non-conference schedule is really to get to this point, and you want to be in a good situation, which 9-4, regardless of what you think, is a good situation to be in for this group of guys, given where they've played, who they've played, and some of those results. Granted, some of them were lopsided losses, or appear to be lopsided losses that looked a lot closer by the end of the game. But I think that these guys know going into this Minnesota game Thursday that they are as prepared as they probably could be based on the different kinds of teams they've seen, and also the talent level of teams they've seen, to be ready for this next 18-game stretch.
I'm torn on how much I think this schedule has helped this team, because on one hand, playing a lot of good teams should make you better, especially when you're a veteran team. I think that it's not going to beat you down. You should be able to process these games the right way. At the same time, beating Alabama was big. Beating Mississippi State, or beating Mississippi and NC State on neutral floors, was big. And in the Maryland home win, it looks better a little bit kind of each passing week. Like Maryland is, all the analytics say Maryland, a lot of them put them right with the best teams in the Big Ten. At the same time, that Marquette game is not there to be won at the end of that game. Run off the floor at Penn State, basically, no matter what that final score was. Texas A&M, it was just always out of reach for them. And Auburn, another one where you basically get run off the floor. There were more, 3 of the 4 losses were not really able to be won at the end. They weren't there to be won. And that's where I kind of keep coming back to, and it's going to play into trying to predict whether this team can win a Big Ten championship, especially away from home, is are you going to execute well enough to give yourself a chance to beat some of the other best teams in the conference on the road?
Yeah, and Matt Painter, and this dates back to even when he was playing for Gene Katie, the Purdue kind of idea to winning a Big Ten championship or the stepping stones to a Big Ten title is you take care of business at home, you split your road games in the league. And that's a lot harder now because there's more teams in this league, and some of these trips are a little bit further than you're used to. But I think that's probably still the path. I think it's going to be, especially this year, it looks like there's a lot of parity in this conference, and it's a lot of really good teams. I feel like it's going to be a team that maybe has 5 or 6 conference losses still in the running to win a league title come March.
So let's talk about Purdue's schedule and where it stands now and what it's going to have to attack to get through this back half of the season, back 2/3 of the season and on into the NCAA tournament, trying to win this Big Ten championship. Obviously, they opened in early December. Like I said, you lose at Penn State, you come home and you beat Maryland. And that's definitely if you had to split those, that's the split you would take. Like any loss in the conference on the road is more justifiable than any loss at home, and getting the 1-play win over Maryland, again, which is a team that is trying to put itself in position to have a say in the conference standings, is important because it's just one up that you're going to have on one of the other teams you're going up against. So the 2-play teams this season, IU, Rutgers, and Michigan. This is a very imbalanced schedule, the most imbalanced schedule the Big Ten has ever had. You play 3 teams twice, you play 7 away, you play 7 at home. Is that right? Did I get that right? That can't be right. Am I one off?
That's right.
14. Yeah. Wait, that's only 17 teams though, right? And there's 18. Yeah. Never mind. I'm
you don't
right.
Play yourself.
Bad math in the moment for me. Yes. 7 on the road, 7 at home in the 3-2 plays. So they've already got the loss against Penn State. Their other road games at Minnesota, at Washington, at Oregon, at Iowa, at Michigan State, and at Illinois, the single play games. And then there are 7 single home games: Maryland, Nebraska, OSU, USC, UCLA, Wisconsin, and Northwestern. So to go by Matt Painter's concept there, splitting half of them on the road, that means they're going to have to go 5-4 against Minnesota, Washington, Oregon, Iowa, Michigan State, and Illinois. So I suppose that means even if you lose at Oregon, at Michigan State, and at Illinois, you are then afforded yourself one additional loss, right, against Minnesota, Washington, or Iowa. Well, that's not true. You also have to win. That includes IU, Rutgers, and Michigan, right? So you've got to find a way to win 5 of those games. That seems very doable, and I think that might even be on the low end if this team figures out how to play better on the road. But right now, we're not seeing a team that plays especially well on the road, especially when it comes to cleanly running an offense and not giving points away to the other team, giving possessions away to the other team.
Yeah, and I mean, you don't take anything for granted this year. Rutgers is probably talent-wise a better team than last year, and it's a place Purdue's always kind of struggled. Definitely struggled last year, and if it wasn't for Lance Jones, probably doesn't win that game. Michigan clearly is a much improved team from a year ago, and a place that, even in the last couple of years, Purdue has struggled with superior talent. So, you'd like to think that you're in a good situation playing at Minnesota, which is the worst team in the Big Ten to start off. You should get a road win there, your first road win of the season. And then Purdue plays at home against Northwestern, which has, probably 2 of the better players in the Big Ten, but you start off with them at home. Now, Northwestern has been a team that's been a bugaboo for Purdue, I guess, in the last couple of years, but that bugaboo is Bowie in those cases. So he's no longer there. He's played his decade of college basketball and moved on. So, I think the schedule, at least at the onset, sets up well going into that January 9th game at Rutgers.
Yeah, if you don't use Bugaboo Bowie or Bugabooey in the way that you preview that Northwestern game, I will. I'm just letting you know I'm going to steal it. So you have to use it in some way, or you snooze, you lose on Bugabooey. It's definitely a resumption of the schedule, I should say. I think that favors Purdue. It's tough at the end. We've talked about this before. At Michigan State, at Indiana, home against UCLA, home against Rutgers, which is playing very inconsistently right now, but with two really great freshmen, and maybe they figured something else out by then. And then at Illinois to end the season. Like, that's a tough 5-game slog to end the season. And not long before that, you have to go to Michigan as well. It's a tough end of the season. But at the start of this, I think, for a team that's coming out of having lost 3 of 4 here, going before it won that Toledo game, I think things set up pretty favorably. You get Minnesota on the road, and as bad as Purdue has looked at times on the road, Minnesota has looked bad everywhere they've played for the most part. They're the worst team in the Big Ten by pretty much any measure right now. Then you get Northwestern at home, and yes, Northwestern has bitten them a couple times the last couple of years, but you'd rather have them at home, even though it is a homecoming for Brooks Barnheiser, who's playing really well. And that's something you always kind of wonder if that helps negate some of that crowd advantage you would have, because you get another guy who's just going to be hyped up for that game. You have to go at Rutgers. I think this is the time you'd rather be playing Rutgers there now and home later than the other way around, because of what I was saying before. It's been a very volatile team, but as you said, a talented one. You get Nebraska at home. Nebraska's got kind of a soft, good record right now. Hasn't really beaten. Their best win was like on the road at Creighton, but that's barely a road game. Right. So I don't know. Playing them at home, and that's the one shot they get at you at home, is good. And then it gets tougher, because you got to go at Washington, at Oregon, and Washington's not very strong, but that's still a long road trip. And you've got the Oregon game right after that. You've really got to be locked in for that first game before you can get to that second game and make it mean as much as it could. And then that Oregon game, that's on January 18th at Oregon. That's the biggest road game of the year to me.
Right.
Because right now, Oregon's only loss was at home to UCLA. So UCLA is in good position as we go into the resumption of this. But it was a 2-point loss at home to one of the best teams in the country. That's a team that's going to be a difficult game. It's going to be a huge home game for that crowd, kind of, getting into the Big Ten spirit. And it's going to be a huge road test for a team that up to this point, and maybe they'll have, alleviated some of this by then, but up to this point has not answered true road tests very well yet. Yeah.
And Oregon, Dana Altman's been there forever. I think back to 2 decades ago when he was at Creighton, he really got the ball rolling there, to Creighton being what it's been now for, several years. And Oregon's been very successful under him too. Jackson Shelstad, one of the best players in the conference. Oregon also beat Alabama, just as Purdue did. Oregon beat Texas A&M, which Purdue did not. I think Oregon is, maybe a favorite to win this league. I think Oregon and UCLA right now maybe look like they're a notch above everybody. Maybe you can throw Michigan State in there, which is off to a 2-0 start. And, Tom Izzo's always got his team playing well at the end of the year. So that's something to take into consideration as well. But I think, when I'm circling the games that are going to be make or break for Purdue having a chance to win this league, that January 18th game at Oregon is definitely one. And then that end of the season stretch that you just mentioned, where you've got UCLA at home, you're at Indiana, you're at Michigan State in that stretch, and ending at Illinois. That's going to factor big into conference standings, even if it's not for a title. So
that could then become the biggest road game. If a championship is still on the line and you have to go to Champaign to win it, and by the way, that's another team that could be in that mix, then that becomes the biggest road game, obviously. But this Oregon one, early in the season, early in the resumption of Big Ten play, it's just kind of looms as a pretty massive one. Right now, I think Purdue would be a fairly decent underdog in that game. I think combination of how good Oregon's playing and how questionable Purdue has played on the road, they're going to have to pull an upset to win that game. But if you do, the ramifications are huge for the conference chase. Let's talk about this team and why we think it will or will not have a chance of winning its third. Well, it has a chance. Whether or not it will win its third straight Big Ten championship, which is something almost unprecedented. One Purdue team did it many years ago, decades ago now, but it's not a common occurrence in the Big Ten or really any other league. Start off on the positive side. Like if you were to pick, what's like maybe your number one thing that this team has going for it as to why it can win a Big Ten championship?
Braden Smith, quite simply. But really, those three guys, the three juniors, and just all the experience they have playing together. And I know I've harped on it quite a bit that Purdue has to have somebody consistently be a fourth scorer, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the same guy every night, but you can't have the rest of your team scoring 9 points and beat teams in the Big Ten as you did against Toledo. But Braden Smith makes this whole thing go. Teams are definitely keen on him. Penn State just kind of went blitzkrieg on him and forced the ball out of his hands. I think Purdue's got to be more creative in finding ways to get him involved when teams do that. I wrote the other night that, that version of Braden Smith who took 22 shots, whether he feels good about it or not, is probably what Purdue needs to compete for a Big Ten title. Now, you're not going to shoot 22 times every night. You're not going to score 34 with 12 assists every night. But, I think you feel more comfortable if he's taking 15 to 20 shots every single game just because of his ability to score.
He was going to probably be my number one thing also, even though there have been some ups and downs early in the season, some of it being, just the way that teams take him out of things. But I thought the most important thing about the Toledo game was not that he scored 34 points on the 22 shots, is that he still got 12 assists. I think that's something that Matt Painter can take to him, PJ Thompson can take to him and say, this is what we want it to look like. You're still facilitating. You're still getting everybody else their shots and making this offense go. You're still the engine of this offense, even when you're taking a high volume of shots. He actually played deeper into that game than I think he normally would have, either because they were trying to, get some of those individual marks for him, or just because they wanted that group to play together more to get reset for Big Ten play. But that's what they have envisioned all along. That's what Matt Painter was thinking before the season, that this guy, he's already going to get the assists. He's already going to be the distributor, but he also wants him looking for his shot when it's there. You're looking for both. And what I kind of asked Braden after the game was sort of an extension of that. Like, this is what you've been building towards for 3 years. Like, you got the assists, you got the point guard concept down. Like, that's you've locked that in. Now it's, what are you doing off of that? Like, but you're right that I think that other people have to be doing their jobs to make that happen. And I'm less concerned about the fourth scorer as I am about, is everybody else taking care of the ball? Is everybody else playing defense? Is everybody else rebounding? I think if you check all three of those boxes, I don't know that it matters if the fourth scorer steps up, but they've been inconsistent enough at some of those other things that it's always going to be a concern. That then if you're having another night where the turnovers are a problem, especially if they're leading directly to points, if you're having another night where a team's getting 15, 16, 18 offensive rebounds, and we've seen a few of those already this season, that you're having to play that many extended defensive possessions, giving up that many extra points on the second chance, that then if someone then on top of that is also really limiting one of your three best scorers and that fourth one doesn't step up, that is a problem. But I think if you take care of that first thing, and I think that's within reach for Purdue, then I don't know that I care that much about the fourth score.
Well, yeah, I kind of get your point there. And Toledo should not be out rebounding you, and that was the case the other night. I thought that was an opportunity where you feel like Miles Colvin and Cam Heide can get those boards, and there were a lot of long rebounds, but it's just like those opportunities. And Matt Painter talks about it a lot, between offensive rebounds for a team and then the turnovers. You've got to be ahead in those categories, especially now in some of these big road games in the Big Ten. And a lot of cases Purdue hasn't. And when those things are not in your favor, something kind of out of the ordinary has got to happen. You've got to get a lot of excess points from 3-point range or whatever it might be, or get to the foul line quite a bit and capitalize when you do get to the foul line, which is another concern that we may cover over the course of this conversation. But I think the number one thing is taking care of the basketball. And as good as Braden Smith's been, that has also been an issue when some of these bigger games have come up on the schedule so far, and particularly on the road.
Yeah, we'll get back to that because we're going to talk about the potential drawbacks or the potential shortcomings this team has as far as winning a championship. But if I was going to pick, since you picked Braden Smith, I would just throw in just this team's general experience. And there is definitely a youth to this team. They're asking CJ Cox and Jakari Harris and potentially increasingly Raleigh Burgess to do a lot. But there's also a lot of guys on this team who played significant roles last year, even if they weren't the three starters. It's not like Caleb First and Miles Colvin and Camden Heidi were not involved with what this team was doing last season. I think that the experience from those top three should be an asset. I think you can question whether it's been an asset at times, especially it didn't seem like it was an asset at Penn State. Did not seem like it was an asset against Auburn. We might want to set the Auburn game aside. Auburn looks like it just might be on a different tier that maybe Purdue just can't be on that tier this year. Maybe that's true. And you were playing in there, a couple hours up the road, but it was basically a road game.
It was a 95% Auburn fan base.
Right. So we may need to set that aside, and maybe there isn't as much correlation between that and Penn State or that and Texas A&M or any other game as we might think, or Marquette. But I think it needs to be an asset. I guess I should say that it should be an asset. It needs to be an asset. And I think once you start getting into these more familiar situations, they've all been in these gyms, even with the transfer situation and a lot of teams' rosters changing a lot. They're still familiar with these matchups. They're still familiar in a lot of ways with these styles of play that they're going to be seeing. Now that is changing a little bit though. And I think that's where some of the NCAA tournament experience that these players have had can also come into effect. Like, you're only going to see Oregon once, and you're not that familiar with how they've played basketball. They've been in a different conference. Same with UCLA. Dusty May coming in, and you're going to get Michigan twice, but that first time you play them, it's going to be a different style of play. It's some important different players on that roster. It's both experiences I think could help this team, both the familiarity of being a Big Ten champion and knowing how to prepare for those challenges every single night, and most importantly, helping steer the younger guys in this program in that direction and helping them have the right mindset on any given night and be prepared and know how to approach things. But then also when it's these one-off shots, and especially when you're going on the road for a one-off shot, that's the one thing where I question whether or not this will be a strength. I think it's fair to question it right now. And that's something that I think Braden Smith, Trey Kaufman-Wren, Fletcher Lawyer especially are going to be asked to answer here in the coming weeks.
Yeah, very much so. And I've seen people comment that, Purdue should have an advantage because these guys have played together. They know each other. Purdue doesn't go searching through the transfer portal unless it's a dire need, like a Lance Jones situation. So all of these guys are very familiar with each other, but I think that gets thrown out of the window by this point. A lot of these guys, Michigan had 9 transfers or 9 newcomers on the team this year. Those guys have played enough basketball with each other throughout the course of summer and, summer workouts and now having played 13 games together that you look at the makeup of a team with a Denny Wolf from Yale and a Roddy Gale who has been in the Big Ten for the duration of his career at Ohio State. They're familiar with each other now enough that's a, kind of just a wash, I think. And then these freshmen at Rutgers, clearly by the time you play them, especially a second time, like you mentioned earlier, will have enough experience that it's not going to be an issue that they're freshmen, much like it wasn't for Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer a couple of years ago. So definitely, I think the biggest thing right now is for Purdue to take advantage of this early season schedule. Like you said, playing at Rutgers early versus, if you had it the other way around, you'd be playing Rutgers in the next last game on the road. And instead you're going to play Rutgers at home there towards the end of the season when, Purdue ideally in its situation would be competing for a Big Ten title.
So based on these first 13 games, what's something else we've seen so far that makes you think this team will win a third straight Big Ten championship?
Whew. That's tough to say because, I think there's more maybe things that you can criticize, and maybe that's just kind of our role sometimes. But
it is weird when you cover a team. Sometimes, even when you cover a really good team, you see them every day, and the winning becomes so normalized that you have to make sure you're not overemphasizing the little warts, the small things that might be going wrong.
The other day I wrote that, is this a cause for concern that Purdue didn't put Toledo away until 10 minutes left in that game? Whereas, a team like that coming to your gym, you feel like Purdue should have just run them out of the gym, and the sub should have been playing the duration of the second half. I'm going to say just the evolution of Trey Kaufman-Renn, because this is the role that he said he prefers, but it didn't look like that was going to be his role, at least not as extensively this year. And then adjusting on the fly when Daniel Jacobson breaks his leg, he's looked pretty good for the most part. There's been some games where he didn't look so good, obviously, but to be averaging, around whatever it is, 20 points, 6 boards, things of that sort, and be just kind of a different type of big than what Purdue's had for, 10 years. And to see him kind of grow into this role that Matt Painter said he would. He said before Trey Kaufman-Renn leaves Purdue, he will be an all Big Ten player. And you're looking at him, 2 years ago, even last year as a starter, where he's averaging, 6-7 points a game. And you're thinking, like, really? And now you're starting to see that. And I think that's clearly a huge reason why Purdue is, able to establish itself. It still has the pick and roll, even though it's not in the same facet that it was with Braden Smith and Zach Edey.
Yeah, no, I think that everything that Matt Painter said before the season has sort of come to fruition. And the one thing they're going to have to answer is from an offensive rebounding or defensive rebounding standpoint. That's where he has to have a bigger impact. There's going to be matchups where it's going to be hard for him to necessarily have a big impact there. Michigan, for instance, puts 2 7-footers on the floor. How does this small ball approach match up against that look? And how do you effectively flip it in your favor by doing the things in a small ball lineup, whether transition, whether, the switching you can do defensively? Like, can you make it a positive for you when you face a size mismatch like that? And Trey Kaufman-Renn wanted this. He wanted to be the center. He wanted the small ball approach. He thinks he can take that on, and that can be the best version of this team. And I think once Daniel Jacobson was out for the year, I think that is the best version of this team. I think that's been borne out by what we've seen from the other guys in the front court so far. So now, how often is he asserting himself as a rebounder? The free throw thing is also an issue, but it's not a huge issue. I actually wrote about it today. I was kind of writing about like overreactions out of the Toledo game, which is a thing we do sometimes. And I wrote about, it's been a kind of a roller coaster for him there. He worked on it a lot, started off good. It's been bad the last couple of games. However, anytime he's going to the free throw line, there's like 3 good things that have happened before he ever even takes a shot. Like, it means that they're getting the ball in the post, which they need to do, they want to do. It probably means he got good position on that possession. It means that just means the offense is operating the way it's supposed to. It means he's drawing an individual foul from the opponent's front court player, and if you get enough of those, then that small ball situation really starts to work in your favor. And then it's also a team foul. So 3 good things have happened before he ever shoots the free throw. Now, I think he probably needs to shoot better than 60% and right now he's under 60. So he does need to be better at that. But Matt Painter brought this up on his own a couple of weeks ago after a game. I don't remember which game now, but that his only concern with that was that the free throw struggles would be something that would affect how Kaufman-Renn played. Like, he would want the ball less, or he'd be thinking about it too much. And I know he wants him to shoot free throws better, but it's not like he's not working on it. And I think as long as you're getting all of those other things, that means he's being very productive, whether or not the free throw goes in or not.
Yeah, he's I haven't looked recently, but he was the most efficient player that Purdue had. And, part of that is just because he's able to get the points, shoot at a high percentage. I think he's shooting 60% from the floor. So shooting better from the floor than from the free throw line this year. And Purdue still wants, and some people think this is an antiquated approach because in the NBA, we see teams that just chuck up 63 pointers in a game. But I think playing through the post is kind of the style that Purdue is branded itself on offensively, and it's worked. You don't want to stray away from it as long as it still is working. And I think that is the case still in a lot of ways, whether or not he's hitting free throws at a high clip. And it's not like his free throws look bad. They look like they're on target. They're just hitting the back rim or, popping out a lot of these times. And you get enough of those and it looks bad. But it doesn't look like it's a broken situation, or that, sometimes I think he just kind of maybe overanalyzes it. And that's, if you ever talk to him extensively, kind of his MO is he's a deep critical thinker, philosophy major, I believe. So sometimes I think he might just be overanalyzing these things. But you're right. It's not like he's not asking for the ball. He's still being aggressive. He was very physical. He was, kind of putting his arm in the chest of a defender the other night and shoving him off, and things that kind of more show the evolution of his growth a little bit. That's stuff that Zach Edey did last year. And, when you're 300 pounds, it looks a lot worse because those guys go flying out of bounds sometimes. But I thought that was a good sign that he was trying to establish himself, being physical. And when teams are being physical with him, he's being physical right back and not fearing kind of the outcome. Am I going to get fouled and have to go to the line and get 2 points there versus, just give me the ball and I'll try to make something happen.
I thought it was a good sign too. And I asked about it after the game, and Matt Painter didn't really agree. He was saying that. So for people who didn't see it, there was Javen Simmons, the Toledo player. There was a possession where Kaufman-Renn had posted up, got the ball, and Simmons definitely moved him. He displaced him with contact from behind, and there was no call. And everybody in Mackey was like, ah. And then Kaufman-Renn then just took his arm and swept him out of the way and scored. No call on that either. And then they got down to the other end of the floor and there was some tussling, and the refs actually just stopped play and got them untangled at one point. And so I thought that was, Matt Painter's talking about the physicality, embracing the physicality. I'm like, well, you're introducing physicality there. You're embracing that physicality, but it speaks to how much is asked of Trey Kaufman-Renn that Matt Painter, who obviously saw all that, still comes out of that game saying, no, there's more than that. Are you getting deep enough in the post? Are you running the floor the way you're supposed to run the floor? Are you got to get more than 6 rebounds. You only had 6 rebounds for playing 27 minutes or so in that game, which based on his averages and against a team like Toledo, probably, like you said, it should be more. I think Trey Kaufman-Renn would probably say it should be more. So that's maybe the other thing I'll say from a positive standpoint where you see the upside here is that I think there is still just some unrealized potential with a lot of these guys. And he's one of them just because he has been growing into being a center. It was, even though they worked on it some in the offseason, they were ready for this potentiality. It wasn't his identity. It wasn't the thing that they focused on. And now it is his focus. He is this team's center. So I think there is going to be a reasonable expectation that his play should continue to improve over the course of the season. And then I look around at just the other people on the floor, and, Miles Colvin is going through just sort of a shooting. I hate to call it a slump because it's not like he's not taking good shots or that it looks like his form is way off. Shots just aren't falling right now. It's a shooting whatever. The shots aren't falling, but at some point they will. The same for Camden Heide. I think there's some guys on this team that are a lot of times doing the thing that they're supposed to do on offense, and they're getting an open shot, and it's just not being rewarded by the bounce of the ball on a given night. And that's not me excusing things, because sometimes, there are guys that are doing things that they struggle with. But in those cases, I think I'm seeing guys. I mean, Jakari Harris is an incredible example of this. He's taken a lot of good open looks from 3, and they're just not falling. And maybe there are some shooting adjustments he needs to make. But it was funny. Somebody on Twitter I was talking to the other day and said, I know he's made 5, but I can't remember ever seeing him hit one, or I can't remember the last time I saw him hit one. And they've been sort of scattered throughout the year, and he has hit, I think, 5 3-pointers. But I know where that fan was coming from, because it's just seemed he's open so often and has not yet shown opponents that he can hit that. consistently, so they're going to leave him open. If he ever does start hitting with more consistency, if Miles Colvin comes out of this little funk and this little fog, maybe is a better word for it, and starts hitting consistently, there are definitely some of the role players on offense who are not going to take an abundance of shots, but the ones that they take, I think there's going to be some regression to the mean. I think the math is going to start working in their favor again a little bit, and that's going to be what you were talking about. That fourth scoring presence, I think is sort of already there. It's just right now, not because of turnovers sometimes, not because of failures. It's just shots aren't falling. Whereas if you look at that game the other night, Heidi, Colvin, they all had shots, open shots, just didn't fall. Once those shots fall, when those shots fall in the future, and I think they will, then on at least a reasonably consistent basis, that becomes that fourth scoring option. Although it's scattered, it'll still be scattered.
Yeah, and Matt Painter has said it, as long as I've been covering this team now, and even when I was like filling in, I've heard him say it numerous times through the years, is when a guy goes through a stretch like this, he's got a lot of makes coming his way because he's a big believer in the percentages over the course of a year, even in themselves out. And, maybe the best all-time example of this is, and people forget about it now, but Carson Edwards was not shooting well in 2019 at the end of the year. And then he goes on this incredible hot streak, and the averages at the end of the year look pretty good because he caught fire at the right time. But that was a situation where a really good shooter had struggled for a stretch there and then got hot. And we've seen it, in recent years with some of these guys. Brandon Newman a couple of years ago was an example where he just, got on a stretch where he hit some shots and ended up being a starter because he supplied some offense late down the stretch of that season and helped Purdue win a Big Ten championship. So I do think that, Miles Colvin is not as bad as his shot percentages say he is in recent games. Same with Cam Heidi. I do think that Purdue probably, based on the makeup of this team, has to shoot a little bit higher from 3-point range. It almost seemed like the other day Purdue just felt like it was the better team and it was chucking up 3 after 3 after 3 to start that game and not really working the offense. And eventually it did settle into running an offense. But Purdue's got to be a team that's shooting around 40% from 3 when you talk about the guys that's on this roster and what they're capable of. It was a lot easier last year because a lot of those looks were wide open with Zach Edey underneath. Probably not so much this year. And I asked Fletcher Lawyer after the Auburn game, I said, our team's running you off the 3-point line a lot more than in the past. And he said, well, yeah, we don't have Zach Edey. So that's now kind of our strongest point is our outside shooting, and teams aren't going to let us just sit out there and shoot threes. So that is an aspect that I think has to kind of be in Purdue's favor, hitting 40% consistently throughout the course of the season to compete for a Big Ten title. And one thing I would like to see kind of on that regard is CJ Cox has to be more aggressive. And I know he's a freshman, and I know there are guys who get a lot of shots out there with him, but he's a guy that I think can just get hot. And we saw it against Alabama. We saw it late against Auburn. It didn't matter in the outcome of the game, but it was kind of a symbolic of what he can be when he gets cooking a little bit. He had a nice pull-up jumper the other night, but then just, didn't take any more shots. So I think he's a guy that off the bench has to be that guy that can come in and kind of be instant offense for you, in addition to what he supplies defensively.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that was his MO. I mean, everything we'd heard about him was that like, oh, he showed up right away and was just a super confident shooter. And it's been up and down with that regard. Like he'll have nights where, even if it's just a key stretch where obviously he's just scorching it. And then there's other nights where even he's doing like valuable things, but just from a scoring standpoint, he seems hesitant at times. Another night's a good example. Like he takes one shot from the field, so 2 points. Now he has 4 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals in 14 minutes. Like he's a very productive guy off the bench and helped them win that game. But I do think that it would not be outside the flow of the offense for him to take more shots. Miles Colvin, who I was talking about before, he was a 41% 3-point shooter on 58 attempts last year. He's made 1 of his last 13 over the last 4 games. They're going to start falling. Like he's not that as a 3-point shooter. He's more the first thing. He's more of a true 40% 3-point shooter. Just stuff like that is about, I think, to lean back in Purdue's favor. Now it's just a matter of whether it shows up in the most important nights. Trey Kaufman-Renn has had nights where he made 7 of 10 free throws, and then he has nights where he makes 1 of 6. Like, which of those things happens at Oregon? That might decide whether they win that game. There are some things that are just right on the razor's edge, where you don't have a lot of room for error in some of these bigger games. So let's talk about that. And we're getting kind of late, so let's just wrap it between between defensive rebounding and turnovers. What do you think is the bigger concern for Purdue as far as whether it costs them a Big Ten championship?
I think the rebounds can come by committee, because I think with the smaller lineup, you do have Miles Colvin and Cam Heide, who can probably jump higher than most bigs in the Big Ten Conference, and they should be able to hold their own in the rebounding category. I think turnovers are problematic based on how many games, out of 13, I don't know what the number is, but I'm guessing probably 8 or 9 times Purdue's had double-digit turnovers this season. And this is a team that doesn't have the margin for error it did last year when those kinds of things happened, because Zach Edey erased so much negative with his production on both sides of the court and basically took away anything at the rim for opposing teams and made them settle for jump shots, which are lower percentage field goal attempts. So I think, not so much just the turnovers, it's these turnovers that are happening at the top of the key that lead to an easy layup on the other end. That's, a 4 or 5 point swing in some cases. So you have to limit those. Those have to be few and far between, and not something where teams are getting 12 points off of turnovers at your expense.
I think turnovers is the answer of the two, because I think to some extent, they're yielding some rebounds by deciding to play a small ball approach. And Matt Painter was talking about that after the game, that yes, we're small. We're going to be smaller than a lot of teams with the main lineup that we play. It's more about, what did he say? Small in size, but not small in fight. And I get the point that he's going for there. But to some extent, as when you're talking about the give and take of a strategy, Purdue is giving some rebounds away in order to gain some things. The defensive switching, what you can then get out and do in transition when you do get a defensive rebound. And if another team is crashing the boards, like he was talking about, Toledo doing and other teams doing, if you crash the boards that hard to go for those offensive boards, when you get the defensive rebound, it should pay off in transition going the other way. And by the way, it did on a handful of times on Sunday night. So I agree that turnovers is the bigger problem, because of what, number one, the thing you just talked about was it's given away too many points. If you know you're going to give away some offensive rebounds, and there's maybe not a lot you can do about them getting some of those, then you cannot give them an abundance of other baskets, easy baskets in those backcourt turnovers. But more than that, whenever they've had these turnovers, it's been an indication of the whole offense being constricted or just thrown completely out of whack. Teams have been able to, I think, on a couple occasions too easily get in Purdue's head and just get it out of its identity. And listen, when teams are hard hedging Braden Smith the way they were, and he still has not taken it, he's not taken a free throw attempt in any of the games that they've lost, which is and he's never been a high volume free throw shooter. That's still a really interesting stat to me, that it indicates how much they're taking the middle of the floor away from him. It indicates how much they're taking away some of the pick and roll stuff, indicates how much they're taking away the drives. So what are they doing to compensate for that and have a different way to attack what teams are doing than trying to kind of bully their way through it? Because I think that's what leads to some of these turnovers. It was a problem at Penn State. It was a problem against Marquette. We'll set Auburn aside for the time being, but it's the most correctable thing. It's more correctable than the offensive rebounding, but I wonder if that's what ultimately makes it the thing that could undercut their chances of winning this, even if it only costs you one more game that you weren't supposed to lose. And I would kind of include Penn State there. I mean, maybe Penn State won that game outright. I mean, give them all the credit, but that's one on paper coming into the season. You would think that Purdue would certainly not be down by 27 with 10 minutes to play. Like, you can only do that so many times and still be in contention to win the championship.
Yeah. And listen, Purdue has stubbed its toe early the last couple of years and still come back to win a title. Happened with Rutgers 2 years ago. It happened last year with Northwestern. And, I don't think that losing at Penn State takes you out of the conference race by any means, because over the course of this Big Ten season, you're going to see a lot of these teams beat each other up, especially when teams go on the road, and Penn State's kind of out in no man's land territory on top of that. So it's not an easy place to travel. And, the environment there sometimes can be just a little overwhelming, not in the way it is at a Maryland or a Rutgers or something like that, kind of in the opposite of not much fanfare at times. And I think you're going to see more Penn State fans maybe over the course of the season if it keeps playing the way that it has so far. But it's a tough place to play, just kind of in that way, in a different realm, I think. But because you're behind the eight ball, because you've lost a game on the road, if you want to say that, because there are 3 teams that won both of their early season Big Ten conference contests. You have to pick up a win somewhere that maybe wasn't expected, a place like at Oregon or at Michigan State down the line later down in the season, to kind of, maybe offset that. Like I said, I think it's going to be a team that has 4 or 5 losses at least winning this championship.
And it typically, like, you don't see a lot of 18-2 out of the Big Ten champion, right? I mean, Purdue last season was 17-3, but again, a national championship caliber team, 15-5 the year before that when they won it, but they won it going away by 3 games when they did that. So again, that just sort of tells you what this league is. It's a rugged league. Everybody knows that. So if you go by the Ken Pom projections right now, not the game-by-game projections, but the season projection it does. Do you know who it has as the projected champion right now?
Oh, boy. I would say Illinois.
Illinois is 12-8. They would be 5th, tied for 5th. I'll just go ahead and tell you it's Michigan. Now, at 14-6. Now, if you actually go game by game, I think they actually have Michigan 16-4, but because there's a win percentage ascribed to each of those, then you actually get credit for less wins when they're doing the season projection, whatever, but gives them some for the variance of whether you win or lose games. But 14-6 for Michigan, but they're a team that started 2-0. UCLA 13-7, but they're a team that started 2-0. Michigan State 13-7. I believe, I'm going to double check, they started 2-0. Yes, beating Minnesota and Nebraska. So that's why those projections are kind of out in front right now. Purdue is actually only 11-9 in those projections. If you go by game though, they're 14-6, which puts them right back in contention. But as we're seeing just from the number of teams that are sort of clustered together, it doesn't seem like there's an elite team in this conference this year, but there are like 7 teams right now that seem really jammed together as far as who you would think is going to be in the mix to win this championship. So we think Purdue will be one of them. So we used to do a thing with my last job that I started on our podcast called Mark It Down Monday. This isn't a Monday, but we'd make like these predictions on our Monday episodes. Like, this will happen this season for Ohio State football. So for Purdue basketball, predicting it right now, gun to your head, does Purdue win the Big Ten championship this year for a 3rd straight season?
I would say no. And I will say this, though. When we turned in our Big Ten media polls earlier this year, I picked Purdue first. Knowing what I know now and having the, advantage of having seen non-conference play in a couple of conference games, I would say no.
I would also say no. I think they're going to be right there. I think they'll be in the mix. I think they'll have a chance to win it. I don't think that I don't think this team is going to like drift back. I'd be surprised if they went 11-9 and finished whatever this would be, 7th in the Big Ten, tied for 7th. At the same time, this team, the past 2 seasons, has had something that negates mistakes. As you mentioned it earlier in this, when you had Zach Edey, it covered up a lot of things. You could have a bad night on turnovers, but he was going to be so automatic whenever you got him the ball and cause so many problems for teams defensively that you could pull out ahead. There's a reason that they only lost 3 times last year and was all on the road to pretty good teams in conference play. This season, there's just going to be a lot more volatility, a lot more variance. There's going to be nights, as we saw at Penn State, when things started going downhill that night, there was really no wall they could put up to stop that. Zach Edey was that wall last year. There was nothing they could do to course correct in the middle of that game. It was just an avalanche rolling downhill on them. And I think that they are going to be more vulnerable to losing a game at home this season. I don't know that they can go undefeated at home this season. I think I picked them to go 9-1 at home in my preseason predictions, and the one that I picked them to lose at home was the Ohio State game, coming back out of the West Coast, just because it seemed like an interesting one to pick, like based on like what the dynamics of that season could be. Ohio State's been very volatile, so I don't even know how good they are, but I think they're more vulnerable to losing at home, and I think they are definitely more vulnerable, as we've already seen, to just not being able to turn things around when things are going bad on the road. There's still room for them to change that narrative. There's still room for them to fix that, and I think they have some of the qualities to do that. But until we see it, again, as you're picking today, December 31st, it's hard to put a lot of faith in the idea that they can get through this only losing certainly no more than once at home, and then to only lose 4 more games on the road out of 9 against some of the teams they have to play. I think it's going to be tough, because and also that sort of season, like 14-6, 15-5, is leaving you no margin for error, right? Like somebody else out there is going to be doing that or better.
Yeah, and right now, I would say Michigan State, UCLA. You said Michigan is, at least by data, a favorite, and then Oregon are probably the teams to beat in this league. I think Indiana still has a say in this thing, not maybe as a conference champion, but there's so much talent on that team that I think that's a team that's going to kind of shake up this Big Ten race. Maybe not in itself chasing a championship, but it just has the talent to go out and beat somebody that's competing for a title and kind of flip this thing upside down. And that's what this league is this year. This has been kind of the thing that Iowa, I think, has done in recent years, where it wasn't competing for a Big Ten title, but had the talent to kind of neutralize somebody else on a given night and make it a tough win or a tough road to a league championship. And I think Northwestern is an interesting team because, I think back to 2 years ago, Chris Cullen's on the verge of probably getting fired, and the team beats Purdue, gets hot, makes the NCAA tournament, and now he's got one of the the better programs in this conference, and guys and Martinelli and Tyberry and Brooks Barnheiser. I think that experience bodes well for that team also being not one that maybe competes for a league title, but that has a say in how the league ends up being standings wise at the end of the year.
Among the teams that we've brought up as being in this mix, we think at the end of the season, Illinois, Maryland, Michigan. I'm looking down this list. UCLA. So that's 4 of them. I'm double checking this to make sure it's right. Indiana plays all 4 of those teams once at home.
Mm-hmm.
So right there, that's how a team like Indiana, which has been inconsistent to say the least to get things started, and is really trying to figure some things out at midseason, could really impact this race. Because even though you're allowed some variance on the road where you're going to take some losses, they're playing the best teams in this conference, all the other best teams in this conference, almost one shot at home. That's where they could factor into this. So it's going to be interesting to watch it play out. You're going to watch it in person on Wednesday in Minneapolis, my favorite Big Ten city, by the way. Wish I was going, but we split these things up. I'll get to do the Pacific Northwest jaunt here in a couple of weeks, but enjoy Minneapolis. And thanks to all of you who joined us for Sam King. I'm Nathan Baird. That was Boilers Extra.